Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Emotional Abuse is Real. I'm your host, Serene Leeds. I'm a professional writer and storyteller, and I'm so glad you're here. Well, friends, as I said last week, we've come to the end of this particular journey together. Recording this episode is incredibly bittersweet. But I think it's rather poetic that I'm ending this podcast the exact same way that I started it, with just me. On the one hand, I'm really excited to pivot to a podcast that aligns more with my expertise and my overall mission as a professional writer. But on the other hand, I'm sad to stop telling stories of such brave and empowered people. But I do feel that I've made the right decision here. Like I say on every episode of this podcast, I am not a mental health professional. So in many cases, I just don't have the skills to help my guests in a way where they can truly benefit. Also, one of the biggest occupational hazards of hosting a podcast that tackles such a sensitive subject is it's been quite a challenge finding guests who are comfortable talking about their abuse, which I want to make absolutely clear is perfectly understandable. I have plenty of tales of guests who booked their interviews only to cancel at the last minute because they ultimately weren't ready to go public with their story. And this also includes guests who recorded entire interviews, deciding well after the fact that they weren't confident enough to share their experience. Yes, that's frustrating for the podcast host, but I get it. The last thing I ever wanted to do with this podcast was to put pressure on anyone or to make anyone feel uncomfortable. What I'm trying to say is that every single person who has appeared as a podcast guest has my unwavering gratitude. Your bravery and your honesty are an inspiration to so many others who just aren't ready to open up yet. It has been absolutely wonderful connecting with so many of you over the past couple of years. I began this podcast just under 2 years ago to raise awareness about emotional and narcissistic abuse after an article I wrote on the topic was never published. Back in March 2023, I never could have imagined that I would single-handedly produce 81 episodes and boast over 25,000 downloads. Still, just saying that out loud blows my mind. But as I also said last week, this is not the end of the podcasting road for me. I will be pivoting to a different topic soon, one that better aligns with my career as a professional writer. While I'm still fleshing out this new podcast, I can tell you right now that I want to talk to my fellow writers, authors, scribblers, scribes, poets, journalists, copywriters, content writers, professional writers. You catch my drift. So if you're listening to this podcast episode and you fit this description, please drop me a line at hello@sereneleadswrites.com so we can get the conversation started. Just as I did with Emotional Abuse is Real, I will offer a guest application form for the new podcast. So keep your eye out for that document soon. While I don't have a launch date for the new podcast yet, I don't want to be radio silent for too long, so my plan is for some time in Q1 of 2025. On that note, I really hope you'll stay connected with me through my social media and, more importantly, my weekly newsletter. By subscribing to my free newsletter, you'll be the first to know about what's next on my podcasting journey and in my writing career. In full disclosure, I'm preparing for a newsletter pivot as well, moving from Kit to Substack. While I won't be sending out any newsletters from my Substack until 2025, I recommend that you sign up to my Substack now so you can be on my list and ready to receive all my updates starting in January 2025. I've left the link for you in the show notes. Also, make sure you're following me on Instagram and Threads at Serene Leeds Writes. That's SarenLeedsWrites, and over on Blue Sky at sereneleads.bsky.social. You can also check out my website, sereneleadswrites.com, for more information about my writing services, my podcast guesting appearances, and my latest published articles. You can find all the links to my social media, my website, and my still under construction Substack in the show notes. As a final reminder to emotional abuse survivors out there listening, please note that this podcast is not a substitute for professional mental health services. If you are a victim of emotional abuse and need help, please call or text the Suicide and Crisis Hotline at 988. Or call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. You can also text START, S-T-A-R-T, to 88788. Once again, don't forget to follow me on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky, and join my Substack list. Thanks so much for listening to Emotional Abuse is Real. I am so grateful to everyone who has listened to not only my story, but to the countless other stories that have been featured on this podcast. And I truly hope that you'll join me for my upcoming new podcast endeavor in 2025. This is the end, but it's not goodbye. Until then, I wish you a wonderful holiday season and a very happy new year.